Hello YouTube. Today we're going to learn how to repair and paint an old dresser. This was my childhood dresser. It's been inherited by my children. Solid wood, and we're going to look at repairing it. First thing we need to do is move it to an area which we can work on it without having to damage any of our nice things like our carpets, our rugs, or our walls. Okay, so now that we pulled out all the drawers from our dresser, we were able to move it downstairs, and we can now identify things that need to be repaired. Looking at the top of the dresser, we can see that these screws have been pulled out just to the sheer weight of people lifting by these tops. Well, that's not too hard. Fill it in with some wood glue, and hopefully it should last. You could go the extra mile and buy another trim of wood here. Remove all the screws. Fill in wood fill with the part of the wood up here that it yanked out with the screw. And then re-screw everything in. Kids are hard on furniture, and I was definitely hard on this dresser when I was a kid. One example you're often going to see at these dressers is these old Formica board bottoms will end up warping and bending out and breaking. Not that hard to fix. Basically, you're going to go back to the bottom of these. You're going to put in new screws. Try to line it up with the wood. And in this case, we even had an edge breakout, which made the drawer go in lopsided. I just found another trim piece of wood that was about as tall as this far side. And I was able to put in some screws to make sure it didn't go in lopsided anymore. One failure though, you can see that I missed on a screw here and there, and it came up. If you go too far over, this could start tearing any clothes that come through, but that's fine. We're going to reinforce these corners with wood glue and then let it dry. That way it can survive another generation. With this drawer here, when I was about 12 years old, I got curious and wanted to know what the inside of wood looked like. Kids do stupid things. Well, in this case, this isn't too hard. I'm going to take a little bit of plaster or mud, and I'm going to fill in that hole. If we were staining, we'd want to use wood fill, sand it in a bit, and then stain over. But since we're just going to paint, I'm going to use a little bit of just drywall fill and fill that, take care of it, and then paint right over it. Nice 12-year-old daddy. So by getting just some standard wood glue with an angled tip, I can then properly reinforce the joints of this old dresser, and we can hope to get a few more years out of it, assuming no one is directly destructive with the dresser. And just some short lines along the seams will do it. Now this glue needs about 24 hours to fully cure, but in about 30 minutes you'll be able to move things around. Okay. Now I know I said I was going to use basically spackle or mud or something to fill this hole, but I happened to find some good old wood filler just laying around that I hadn't used yet. Now, painting, I don't need the wood filler, the mud would be fine, but let's say someone down the road wants to strip the paint, 20 years from now if this thing's still surviving, and, stain it. So let's go ahead and just use wood fill for that person 20 years down the road. A little hard doing this stuff one-handed. Oops, it's going to drip right through. It's too wet. Give me a minute. Alright, I needed 2 hands to do that, but just squeeze that wood fill in. And then use your putty knife. Make sure it's in there good. And then we'll come back and sand off the excess, and it will properly match. My wood fill is a little wet. The ingredients in it started to separate. So that's fine. I just closed the lid back up and squeezed the bottle a couple times to remix everything. Alright, we'll let that dry and I'll come back and sand it. Alright, before we start sanding, I just want to cover a little pet peeve of mine. So you'll see in all these cabinetry refinish videos and all this where they're like, before you sand, make sure you clean the surface very well with a degreaser or something like that. And I sit there and go, that is just completely unnecessary work. Sanding alone takes away that degreasing. Sanding alone cleans the top. So why would I waste my time with one of those products they're trying to sell? Or someone's just like, oh, just use vinegar or whatever. Just sand it. Any dirt, debris, oil, or anything you have on there is going to come right off. Okay, so before we can paint, we really do need to sand. First off, you can see the sheen, and you can see where I've already started sanding. Now, you only really need a light sanding to take care of this. Just enough to get rid of the sheen and then open it up for a layer of primer and paint, or possibly even new stain if you're going to stain. Make sure you sand with the grain, not against, or you're going to have a lot of scratches you can't account for later. Okay. You're going to come up across these little decorative edges. This is why I have more of a sponge sander, because now I can get kind of right into those a little easier. Very simple. Make sure you sand every place where there's regular stain. Because those are really the only places you're going to paint. You don't want to paint on your drawers the inside of the woods, as this is going to cause additional friction to the drawers, a lot of rubbing. It's going to be just bad for you down the road if you want good looking furniture. Only paint and stain the front faces of your drawers. The same for in the cabinetry. You only want to paint and stain just your front stoppers. Don't go into there, or you're going to have paint and stain rubbing against each other, causing friction, breaking down the furniture, looking like a mess. Alright, so as you're sanding, go ahead and just kind of wipe off the sand and look for any spots where you still see some sheen. Little shiny spots that just might need a little extra sanding. Make sure that sheen is gone. I can see it, but I got a little bit sitting right around here. Here's the street cleaner outside my garage. Now you might be a little curious, why aren't I using like a electric sander or something? The reason being is electric sanders are essentially mini saws, and when you're trying to make your finish look nice, you don't want to sand too deep in one spot or not enough in another spot, especially when you're trying to refinish delicate cabinetry or dressers like these that are old. Also, if you can see when I'm moving this, it kind of wiggles a bit. You know, a lot of the glue and joints are wearing down. So don't use too much force, or you're either going to cause structural damage while you're sanding. Alright, with the sanding done, go ahead and take a damp cloth and remove all sawdust from your work. Anywhere you see sawdust, go back and wipe again. Everything should be slightly dulled. You can see here between the areas that are drying and wet, it almost confuses you to make you think that you didn't get all the sheen off. But it doesn't really matter that much since we're not going to use stain. Stain is very important to make sure we get all the protective coat off. But with paint, we're going to throw a primer on here, and that should fix just about any problems we're going to have. Great thing about using primer is even if your sanding job isn't perfect or didn't get absolutely everything, the primer will essentially put down a layer of glue that will hold the paint properly instead of you having to deal with unnecessary peeling or anything like that. So, very simple. Put a little on your brush. And start giving it a very easy thin coat over everywhere where you need to paint. Before you know it, job will be done. Now some folks might want to worry about the brush marks going down here, but that's fine with the primer. Paint, if you were to brush, after a couple coats your brush lines will disappear. Or in our case, we're going to paint with a small roller to help give a nice smooth finish over these brush lines. See, that's the primer. And now we're just going to do the face of the drawers.